Thank you very much for finding us. You have tuned into the Axe and Scalpel podcast. I'm Johnny V, joined by Dr. Rick Rapp, joined by Dr. Jacob Smith. And we actually, during this podcast or this episode, we have a special treat, and we're really looking forward to it. Rick, you brought a very special guest in today.
Yes.
And we're going to be learning about a fantastic journey, I believe.
A fantastic journey. Yes, I have brought my dad, Mr. Thomas Rapp, all the way from South Central Texas. Not where I was born and raised, but where God has led you to now, and we're going to get to hear some of that story. And so I'm going to be doing an interview of my dad, and these guys are going to pop in with some of their very wise and witty questions, I think, as we go. But so first, we're in the North Midwest. Tell us about your connection to the North Central Plains.
Well, actually, my father, your grandfather, grew up in St. Paul. Okay,
he's a good man already.
He was born in North Dakota, in a little town called Herdsfield, North Dakota, and then when he was a young man, he and the rest of his family of 7 kids moved into St. Paul. So he grew up there until about the time of the start of the Second World War, when he went in and became a pilot, Army Air Force, because there was no Air Force yet. And
what did he fly?
B-17s, B-24s. Yeah.
In Pacific?
Yeah, out in the Pacific, yeah. And by coincidence and the connection to Colorado, where we all were from, was that one of his roommates was dating my mom at the time. And so she would send letters to, I think his name was Henry, and somewhere along the line, Dad started adding a line or two onto those things, because Henry introduced the two of them. And then it wasn't too long before Henry was left out of the process, and they were writing their own letters. And my dad...
I did not know this part of the story.
No, you didn't know this part. By then, it was about the time that he got a first leave, and so he decided he was going to go and meet this Dorothy Niblo in Denver, Colorado. Yeah. And that was your grandma, my mom.
Yeah.
And... things led to one, things led to another, and pretty soon the war is over, and then they decide that they're going to get married. And so Dad was the first of the Rapps from the St. Paul area to move to Denver. And
started an
exodus from,
An exodus.
Yeah, really. Uncle Don went to CSU in Fort Collins. Uncle Ed went to Colorado School of Mines. Uncle Dick went to University of Denver. I was born there, grew up most of the first 73 years of my life in the Denver area on the north side in a suburb called Thornton, Colorado, which when I was growing up was this little bitty suburb town that didn't even exist, that was a brand new suburb that was built right after the war. And all of the military men came back, married there, grew up there, went to high school in Thornton, Colorado. A lot of things transpired there. I went to the University of Denver on a full-ride academic scholarship because my parents had both graduated from DU, and every year they had 8 academic scholarships that were full-ride scholarships. So I got one of those and went through DU.
Only 8? That's impressive.
Only 8.
Wow.
And so I went through DU and never having to pay tuition, but hopefully I had enough brains to figure that part out. So that was it.
Now, growing up, you did sports, you did... What all did you?
I played baseball, some football, 2 years of football, baseball and basketball mostly. Baseball was my sport.
Yeah.
Second baseman.
First.
Oh,
first
baseman, always first base.
That's the best position.
That was
Football, what'd you play?
Tackle.
All right, there we go.
Yeah.
Unsung hero.
What
are those unsung heroes we talking about?
Second team, unfortunately, because the big guys were out there, and I was.
You had the height, but you weren't the bulky
Tom,
one.
you could have lied about that. Nobody's going to look.
Couldn't lie about the height.
No one's looking up the Thornton High School statistics.
Yeah. So, but anyway, the only college sport I played was I did play freshman baseball. Yeah. And I did hit a home run against the Air Force Academy in a doubleheader, but everybody on the team hit home runs that day, so it wasn't that big a deal.
That high altitude in Denver. Yeah, of course.
They didn't have the humidor back then.
The humidor. So, but, and then, you know this part, but I was engaged to a girl other than your mother.
Yeah.
And the Vietnam War was winding down. I was already set to go to a program out in Irvine, California, which my biology, zoology was my major. So I had been awarded a full tuition fellowship, which would have paid me through the PhD to go to Irvine, California and study population biology, which was a brand new field, everything else. And Vietnam War came along. Yeah. And the draft came along. Yeah. And my draft board said, you're going to be going in this next batch. So I and my intended at that time decided that, I didn't really want to go and be cannon fodder. And I did have a choice because of my undergraduate bachelor's degree to go to a military officer program. And I thought I'd probably rather go Navy. Yeah. And, and have some choice in the matter. So I went down, signed up for officer candidate school in the Navy. And then subsequently to that, my intended and I decided that since our parents didn't get along with each other very well, that even though we were close, we didn't think that was a good situation to bring kids into. And so I broke it off. Yeah. And it was a real heart-rending situation. Yeah. But in the meantime, I had an obligation. I'd signed on the dotted line. And the Navy expected me to honor that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I imagine so.
So it was going to be a year or so before my class was called up. So I went and I taught school for a year. That was my first year of teaching. And thing there, my major course was biology. I had a minor in math. I had like 10 hours of college math, but they had an opening for a math teacher because of a lady who was on sabbatical leave for being pregnant. She happened to be the department chairman, and they had to plug me in 2 days before the start of school. And they said, by the way, you're the department chairperson.
Because they didn't want that role either?
No, it was just, it went with it, the schedule. And so there I am. And so there was a whole lot of, on my part, at the department meeting saying to this guy, well, what do you think? And 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 they loved it. They said, well, this is the best department chairman we've ever had. They care about what we think. But so anyway, I went from there then to Naval Officer Candidate School. That was in May of 1969. Mm-hmm. And I was there in Newport, Rhode Island, learning how to be a naval officer in the Naval Reserve. And I went through that, and this is where my Christian growth really started, because my brother and I had grown up outside the church. Mom and Dad didn't have us going to church. Yeah. Okay. Wasn't sure for sure. I still to this day am not absolutely certain whether they both made it into heaven, but I think so. But in any case, as far as my situation goes, Naval Officer Candidate School was my first real exposure when the Lord tapped me on the shoulder. Yeah. I'd been there about 3 days, and I came on the intercom and said, well, if any of you guys are not wanting to get up at 5:30 in the morning and go out on the grinder and stand there for morning inspection, you could go to choir practice and be part of the Naval Officer Candidate School choir. And I thought, well, I'm not too dumb. Yeah.
and you can carry a tune.
I could carry a tune. I played the piano. I thought, okay, I'll do that. So, that meant that I was in the Naval Officer Candidate School choir, which was run by the Protestant and the Catholic chaplains. All the guys that were there were volunteers. But as far as I know, they were all Christians. Yeah. I was not yet. But for those 18 weeks, I was singing Catholic and Protestant hymns. Yeah. 18 weeks of going to the Protestant and Catholic services, singing both the same songs, and being with these guys that there was something about them that they were singing because they had a reason, and I was singing because I was avoiding morning formations. and it occurred to me that the only time that any of us had free was like Sunday morning. Yeah. They could be sleeping in, but that place would fill up with officers that were coming to a service. Yeah. Why were they there? So I'm thinking, well, this is important. I need to explore this a little bit. I graduate from Officer Candidate School as an ensign, which is the lowest commissioned officer, and then I have to go to a duty station preparation training. Yeah. Okay. This is in Washington, D.C., and it so happens that the only Christian of my father's family was my Uncle Don. Yeah. living in Beltsville, Maryland, about a half hour away from where I had to go for that month. And Uncle Don says, well, instead of staying at a motel, come stay with us. Well, I said, well, okay, that'd be fun. So I go and stay with them. Well, being a Christian family, they went to church on Wednesday, they went to church on Sunday, they were all involved. And I got to find out that Christianity wasn't just an hour on Sunday morning, that it was a lifestyle, that there was something more to it. And of course, I sat through 4 weeks of that and the Sunday morning invitations and feeling like I needed to come forward, but not knowing why. And so I missed my chance. And I thought, well, I'll explore this more someday. And then, so the last Sunday happened to be the church picnic, which was taking place right across the street from my uncle's house. And there's a merry-go-round on there. And I've maintained to this day that God will break an arm to save a soul.
Yeah.
Because my cousin is playing around on the merry-go-round, falls off, breaks his arm. Of course, the pastor, being a good pastor, comes to check on his parishioners, see how things are going. They're all in the back room. Hey, Tommy, would you get the door? And I go and open the door, and there's the pastor who's come to see, but he's looking at me, and I'm thinking, this is the guy whose invitation I turned down this morning. and it just hit me like a, wow, ton of bricks kind of a thing. And so I thought about this, and that night I got down on my knees, and I said, Lord, I don't know you, but I need to know you. I want to know you, and I'm willing to turn myself over to you. So that was October 19th, 1969. Yeah. And that early morning of the 20th of October, 1969. And so things changed real quick. That next morning, my last morning to go and check out, I had been scheduled to go to Charleston, and be stationed in Charleston. I go in, and the head man says, Mr. Rapp, we just had the same duty station open up out in San Diego. Would you like to go? And I'm thinking, no, I hate the humidity on the East Coast. And I love San Diego. It's a pretty place. And so, I think I'd like to go to San Diego. Yep. Okay. Well, as you know, your mama was also in the Navy and was enlisted. We both end up at the same command. We didn't know each other. Yeah. I end up, but I got one thing I got to back up. This is the most important part. I'm also coming back after having made this change of duty stations. I'm going back to Uncle Don's to check out. And I get off the interstate. I come around to his house, and I go through this forested area, and all of a sudden, the light kind of shifted. Yeah. And it got pinkish. Yeah. Okay. And I felt this sense of love. Yeah. All right. Nothing like I'd ever experienced before. That to me was God saying, you made the right choice. I didn't hear him. I heard him inside. I felt him. And so I get back to Uncle Don's house, and I'm saying, well, it's been great and everything. Let me give you some money for the food I ate and everything else. And he says, no, it's family. We'd take care of it. I said, well, if it hadn't been for you, I wouldn't have met the pastor. And he says, you want to make a commitment to the Lord, don't you? And I said, oh yeah. He says, but I thought you had to do it in the church on your knees up in front and everything else. He says, no. He says, I could take your confession. He says, but if you'd prefer, I'll call a pastor, and on your way out of Washington, D.C., you can go by his house. So he called. Yeah. So that afternoon at 4 o'clock on the 20th of October, 1969, I hit my knees at the pastor's house and made it official. Yeah. So that was the beginning. Yeah. So that was 10 days prior to my 23rd birthday. Yeah. So this was not something that happened because the family socially said, you're a Christian. Yeah. This happened because of a decision that I made and thought through and wrestled with and chose. Yeah. Okay.
I think that sounds familiar a little bit.
Yeah. So, and then just to kind of speed through the process. So Jean, your mama, and I ended up being at the same duty station in San Diego. I was dating other people. She was dating other people. I knew who she was. She knew who I was. I was the command athletic officer who set up all of the events when we'd have basketball and everything else. The beach party that we had, a command beach party, she went with the guy she was dating. I went with this Marine lieutenant, real pretty little gal. That was one of the ones that came to
Did she have her head shaved?
Yeah. No. She no. And so we pieced it back together and said, well, we were at the same event. Yeah. A little later, we happened to be at the same San Diego Padres event when Willie Mays hit his home run that tied the record or broke the record kind of a thing, But we weren't together. We were each with somebody else.
Yeah.
But then the Vietnam War started to wind down. And so there was this early out that came through for a bunch of reserve officers because all the guys from Annapolis had to have a place to come back to from Vietnam because they're lifers. And so I was on this list of, several hundred naval officers from the reserves that suddenly became inactive reserves.
Yeah.
Well, that meant you weren't paid.
Yeah. Go do something else.
And I'm at this point dating this other girl, and I'm thinking that may be Miss Right. I'm not sure. I don't know yet, but I need to stick around in San Diego. So I started selling correspondence courses because I was in education. And I thought, that'd be good. I could sell these correspondence courses. That was before the internet existed and all. You could do everything online. So I went to start selling correspondence courses for LaSalle Extension University. And Jean, his mom, sent in out of the TV guide this thing to find out about computer programming. And of course, I happen to be the salesperson that comes knocking on her door. And I knock on her door, and she opens it, and I says, I know you. And she says, I know you too. Well, the next night I asked her out, and here we are.
Yeah.
Okay. Get out.
Yeah.
Smooth talker.
50.
She got a husband, some kids, and a career out of
her
it.
career in computer programming.
Not bad. Yeah.
The triple threat.
Yeah. And so but then, and then the last piece I want to share with you is, so how do we end up out of college? Because we came back to Colorado, and I put in a full career, 26 years in the school district that I'd been at. In fact, a lot of those
graduated from, yeah.
A lot of those were in the same exact building that I had gone through senior high school when the town was little. And then it was a middle school. And I was there, and I was even the acting principal in the building for a while. I was assistant principal most of the time, and so on. And so that was my career. And then I decided it was time to do something else, and I decided to take a retirement. And it wasn't too long before I realized, we don't really have the income for me to be retired. I need to do something. So I looked up in the want ads, and I was looking for a job that I could do.
Yeah.
And there was this place called the Senior Hub, and they did all kinds of things for people my age and up, people 50 and up kind of thing. So I decided that, I'd apply to that. Well, I was there for about 6 months before the department chair for the Retired Senior Volunteer Program opened up. And that was right up my alley because I'd done a lot of volunteer work as a middle school assistant principal with kids.
Yeah.
Junior high kids, and I thought there's a lot of similarities with seniors.
Yeah.
You want me to do this? Why?
Yeah.
I'm not getting paid for this.
Yeah.
This is volunteer work, and so on. So for 20 years, I did that, and I ran the two county area on the north side and east side of Denver. I had volunteers, like 700 and some volunteers, help them find places to volunteer in hospitals, food banks, schools, and all this kind of stuff. And in time, in 2019, I decided that it was time to retire. Yeah. Okay, my wife and I agreed. We didn't have really the money to retire, but she said, I think we can pay off our debts. I think we can make it. And I was ready. And so we were coming down through Texas to see my daughter, who lived in Dallas area at the time. And we would normally do that and then go back at Thanksgiving and then go back home because I had to work. Yeah. I'd retired Jean several years before. So we're coming through, and instead of having to go back, I said, well, let's go see Gary. That's my brother. He was living in Temple, Texas, not too far north of Austin. And so we said, well, let's go see him. And they said, why don't you come meet us? We want to take you over to Fredericksburg, because Fredericksburg has the Naval Pacific War Museum.
In the middle of Central Texas?
And you guys being in the Navy would be really interested in this. And so we said, well, yeah, okay, we'll do that, because Admiral, can't think what his name was. He was from Fredericksburg, and so that's the reason that it ended up there. Okay, and so we stay overnight. We go visit the museum. It is great, and it kind of walks through the war from the beginning to the end, and you could kind of see where your grandpa and the Air Force came along, and island to island to island, bombing them before the guys came aboard. The next day, we said, okay, and my brother takes us back through this little town called Marble Falls, and we're coming in from the south, And we're coming down behind the La Quinta Inn, and I look across this valley, and I say to Gene, who's in the back seat, isn't this a beautiful valley? And I heard, inside, I'm home. I'm home.
Yeah.
We went a little bit farther, and I have this mental picture of an equilateral triangle.
Yeah.
And okay, work with me on this, is this you, Lord? and went a little farther, and I said, well, think about your figures, and what's the least stable figure? A circle, okay? Because you can roll it anywhere. He says, that's kind of like where I place people, right?
Yeah.
You go do the work for me, kind of a thing that I have planned for you. Okay. Well, what about the triangle? He says, well, what's the most stable figure you can think of? Well, you start to come down to 3, because you can't do anything with 2, but 3. Okay, and what's the most perfect of that? An equalateral triangle. Okay, so if you're going to describe the Trinity, what would you use?
Yeah.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Okay. I said, well, okay, if this is you, Lord, I can accept that, but I'm not sure Gene can.
Yeah.
I need to find out 2 things. Number 1, could you validate this for me?
Yeah.
So we get back to my brother's house that night, and I look out through the blinds at a cloudy sky that had been there all day long.
Yeah.
And there's this hole that's opened up, a round hole with an equilateral triangle with 3 bright stars. Bing, bing, bing.
Yeah.
Get out of here.
An
That's beautiful.
Absolute duplication of what I, a few hours before, had visualized inside.
Yeah.
Okay?
Huh.
And I'd say, yeah, you put those stores up there, this must be real. We must be supposed to do this. But then I'm still not sure if this is going to be enough for Gene. So 2 days later, we're about ready to leave to head back to Denver. And I said to Jean, would you mind if we went back through that town? And she says, what town? And I said, Marble Falls. She says, that's the town I've been trying to remember. When we got back to Colorado, I wanted to find out more about this town. Yeah. And I said, well, let me tell you the experience that I just had related to Marble Falls. And so we go back through Marble Falls, and we check it out. And is this a place we'd like to live? Well, yeah. We wanted to get into a small town and get away from the big city. It's got all of the places we like to shop, more or less, and it's got a hospital because we knew we'd need that at some point, and all those kinds of things. And the people seem nice, and so we get back to Colorado, and we started making arrangements to move. Now this is COVID time. Yeah. COVID is just starting. Yeah. Okay. It really came on strong about March. Yeah. But we said, well, we're supposed to move, so we got to figure this out. And I said, well, let's go with a buyout company so we don't have to spend money fixing up the house. Yeah. We went with a buyout company, and the one guy, we talked to several. The one guy said, he was a good Christian. He says, listen, I told him my story. He says, we would like to make you a good deal, and I think if you'll hold off about 2 months, we can make you a better deal. Yeah. And I thought, he didn't have to say that. Yeah. He wasn't, give me the money now. And so 2 months passed, and about May we said, okay, we'd like to. So we set up a closing day on June 30th. We don't have a place to live in Marble Falls. Yeah. We just know that God has called us. Yeah. So it's kind of the Abraham thing. We'll go where I tell you. Not why, but just what. Take care of the what. I'll explain the why later on. Yeah. So we ended up making arrangements, and the way that our daughter and family are connected is that Taya, our granddaughter, their daughter, was scheduled to graduate. So I said to Gene, well, let's go, and then we can go and check out something, because we got to be out of our house by the end of June. So we did. We graduated Taya on the 30th. On the 31st, and we said, we've got a realtor that's going to show us some places down there and so on. But there's this one place called Ridgemont Village that we're kind of interested in. And it's a kind of a retirement type of duplex community. It's not assisted living. It was totally independent living. And Gene says, well, I'm going to email the property manager guy at Ridgemont Village and just say, hey, we're coming down tomorrow. We'd like to explore if you got a spot. So we go down there, and the next morning she's saying, I got to check my emails. This is like at 10 in the morning. And he has answered, and he says, well, we don't have anything right now, but we have a unit that is about to be occupied that isn't yet. You could come and look at it and see if it's of interest to you so that you could get on our waiting list, kind of a thing. Okay. And we said, well, yeah, we'd like to do that. So we arrive about 1, and he says, strangest thing happened this morning. Said, about 10:30 or so this morning, this lady calls me, and she says, you know that unit that I've been paying monthly rent on for my mom to eventually move in for the past 18 months? Yeah. She's never going to move in. Why don't you go ahead and rent that?
Yeah.
And Gene had said this prayer, Lord, if we're supposed to be in Ridgemont Village, you'll make it happen.
Yep.
So in that 3-hour window between 10:30 in the morning and really about 1:30 in the afternoon, he revealed the place that we were supposed to live, not just Marble Falls, but the unit, but the Ridgemont Village, okay? Yeah. And since that time, there have been other things that said not just Ridgemont Village, but the exact unit we're in. So there we are.
Cool. So what has happened? So you were in your 70s.
73.
Retired. And you feel like you hear God calling you to essentially become a missionary to Central Texas.
To Central Texas.
And you've had your whole life in Colorado, essentially. You know, raised your family there. And now we've all moved out in a way. But you followed that call. So what has God been doing with you and Mom in Marble Falls, broadly as well as at Ridgemont Village?
Yeah. Okay, so I recently kind of counted up, and there were like 17 different involvements, but I won't mention them all, but that have happened over that four years, really, since we moved in. We moved in July 4th of 2020.
Yeah.
And so, July of 2025 will be 5 years, basically. Yeah. So we found a church, and I got connected with the pastor, and he and I became acquainted, and he said, I'd like you to become an elder of our church, kind of a thing. And so that happened, and running the hospitality team and the offering team and all that kind of stuff. So that's at that church. But I said to John, the pastor, I said, who do I need to get to know? I'm 73 years old. I know I've been called here for a reason, and I know that I need to work with and through some other people. I need to borrow your credibility, John. Who would you send me to? And he says, go talk to Kevin Nauman over at the Highland Lakes Crisis Network. Highland Lakes Crisis Network is a multi-church group that was set up after a flood in 2017. Local churches figured out, we can't handle this ourselves, but maybe working together we can do some things. And the Highland Lakes Crisis Network was formed. Okay, by the time we get there, the flood's long past, but the cooperation between these churches is growing. Recently, they had a Good Friday service, 12 churches involved.
Wow.
Okay, they all had their own Easter thing, but the Good Friday was collective. And those types of involvements have been what I see the Lord has involved me with is hey, it's all about this Jesus. It's not about this Jesus in this church and this Jesus in this church. And this, about the Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay, the way, the truth, the life.
Yeah.
Okay, not your interpretation of, but him.
Yeah.
Okay, so through there we helped at the warming center when it froze in Texas. We were there in times for COVID when they were doing the COVID testing, the drive-through COVID testing.
Yeah.
We delivered meals to the COVID-impacted folks. We did all those kinds of things. Okay,
Yeah.
and so that's with them. At Ridgemont Village, we kind of came in and joined the Bible study that was there, and after a couple of sessions, they said, would you guys take this on?
Yeah.
So we run the Bible study there at Ridgemont Village. Okay. I mentioned the music stuff. I've done the piano for 60-some years.
Still singing?
I don't sing anymore. Well, I don't sing like I did in... My voice isn't too bad, but I don't sing and play. Because
You're not singing to get out of stuff is what you're saying.
No. But so... when COVID was going on, all of the activities at Ridgemont Village were locked down too. And I said to Chuck, our manager, I said, we sit in this cul-de-sac where our front window and the piano, which we brought down, which is our family piano that I grew up on, my mom learned on it.
Yeah.
And then it became the piano that I and my brother learned on. Well, we brought that from Colorado. It sits in our front room, and right out that window is this cul-de-sac. And I said to Chuck, they could socially distance out there, and I could play a little bit on the piano, and we could do that. Well, that's led to a monthly concert. Now it's in the clubhouse, but not everybody comes. The most I've ever had is like 12. Sometimes it's 2 or 3, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But it serves a need,
Yeah.
And then at church, John, our pastor, said, we've got some people over at the Brixton, which is a retirement assisted living nursing facility. How'd you like to go visit them? So we go visit them, and they said, do you guys have a piano?
Yeah.
I said, oh, yeah, we have a real nice piano. So she introduces me to the social director, and I said, I could play something for the residents if you'd want me to.
Yeah.
So that now is
How
over.
quick was the yes on that?
Really fast. And so over a year and a half later, I'm doing this monthly concert. In fact, when we get back, I've got one on next Friday.
Yeah.
And they got 15, 20, sometimes 24 people in wheelchairs, that they bring into the room and everything else. And the staff says, for some of our people, that's the only time that they emote at all, is with that music, and they get smiles, and some of them are singing songs, and they haven't talked, and everything else. And so there's another ministry piece, and it's just like one thing after another. If I walk out of our residence and down about a half a mile, I can go out and down to the dam, which goes through this farm country, the hill country. Mm-hmm. Okay, a lot of prickly pear and all this kind of stuff and everything else, and down across the bridge and up and out to the dam and back. It's 4 miles walking. So I started doing that on April 17th, I think, of 2021. I'd been there maybe 6 months. And I got to the point where I said, Lord, this is my real time with you. I'm getting away from the noise of the city. I'm trying to quiet my mind. I'm trying to just really listen instead of talk. What do you want to teach me today?
Yeah, no TV, no phone.
No. And so as a result of that, there are now about 80 of these revelations along the road.
Yeah.
That I would say, Lord, this is my time with you. I'll go back and I'll validate it against Scripture to make sure I'm listening to the right spirit, But and time after time after time, to the point that now I've walked 2,800 miles.
Yep.
Okay. Why the 2,800? Well, because the New Jerusalem is 1,400 miles on the side, so that's length and width.
Yeah.
I'll let God worry.
Now I'm trying to
height.
convince him to keep doing it, keep walking.
So, the wall is 144 feet thick.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's I figured it out.
And it is a cube, so it's another 1,400 feet.
Yeah, I'm not going to worry about that one. He can take care of the gravity of that one. But so I'm at least going to do. I'm up to 715 walks now. So 2,860 miles. But
yeah. Do you guys have any questions? We've had a great story. But
Yeah, no. I really like hearing the life story of men from your generation. The question I would ask you and kind of tap into your experience is, it seems that men of your generation and then the one before you, the one you talk about, Rick's grandfather, the World War II generation. I've got 2 grandfathers that I just really grew up admiring, from that generation of men, and then my dad comes from your generation. But it seems like men from those eras that it's clear you've led a life of service to your community, service to your church, educational institutions. It seems like that's a lot less common nowadays. It seems like we're kind of in the era of activism versus a life of service. Why do you think that
Podcasters.
is? But Rick and I are fighting it. Of course, we're part of a big nonprofit. It's hard to get people to participate. But you've clearly led a life of service. Why do you think there's been that change culturally?
I think we've drifted back towards self again.
Yeah.
The whole issue from the beginning with Adam was he followed self instead of following God. He was created to follow God's plan and buy into it and not come up with his own alternatives. And this isn't the only time in history that we've drifted away from that. It's historical. The Bible talks about the failings all along the way. But right now we're in the midst of that, I believe, and it's just following after self-interest and everything. Pride is a big part of it, of course, and everything else. And the selflessness is putting God first.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm attempting, and why I keep doing those walks, is I think that's part of my service, because there's one thing that recently came to me. Okay, it's just 5 words: work, walk, write, share, and teach.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and that, I think, is in a nutshell why we're here.
Yeah.
Why we're not just here in Ladysmith, Wisconsin, but why we're there in Marble Falls, Texas area.
Yeah.
Is it, work for God, walk with God, write about God, which is the Revelations and the Bible, the 2 pieces. Because Jesus said, I came to fulfill the law, but I'm going to put the Holy Spirit in you to explain it.
Yep.
And so it's both sources. It's the writings through history, but that can get real kind of dead.
Yeah.
The Ten Commandments are on stone tablets. Okay.
Yeah.
Instead, God says, I'm going to put it inside you in the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. So you've spent, like I said, a lot of time in personal service, but also helping other people discover service and community service. And I think back to, you were a major player in bringing recycling to Thornton, Colorado, and other things, and just all of these things. You were a coach all the time. You were at all the school functions, and served the church as an elder in so many ways, and all of this. But specifically your time at the Retired Seniors Volunteer Program, we've talked a lot about, because of me as a physician, what you saw happen to people, senior citizens, when they would get involved.
It restored their health.
Yeah.
Okay. People that were not active became active. People that were active became more active. All of them had a reason to exist because they're retired.
Yeah.
And so what's that mean? I just sit until I die?
Yeah.
Is there no use for me any longer? Yeah. And what I found out, the average age of my volunteers was 75. Okay, well, I'm 78, so I'm just past that a little bit. But my oldest volunteer was 102. Oh. Okay, I had over 200 of them that were 80 plus. I had 15 or 20 of them that were in their 90s. One of my best Meals on Wheels drivers was 96 and drove until the week before he died.
Wow.
All right. And he was the one that trained all the new drivers. Okay. And the funny story there was this one driver is about 50-some years old. She calls in sick and says, I can't do the job today. And he says, that's all right. We'll call him up. And he said, yeah, sure. I could do this. And then she found out, here's this 95-year-old delivering for her, and she's feeling sick.
Yeah.
and it just kind of puts things in perspective and realizes that you're not dead till you're dead. Yeah. God has a use for every one of us until our last breath.
Yeah,
and then we can celebrate.
That's what I think. I've said this to many a patient, that I think the biggest cause of death is lack of purpose. Mm-hmm. And that's what I see is with all of the depression and other things. It's lack of purpose, and it's not just in our seniors now too. It's so many people lacking purpose, and so can you speak a little bit about the going from being a young man who did not grow up in church, did not grow up with faith, to trying to be a father passing on faith, and just what that was like? Well,
first of all, Mom and I made our commitments, and you guys were little, very little. You weren't even born yet when we first started at the Presbyterian Church, and that was the other piece of my thing. God brought me through this whole sequence of different churches, which has resulted in my now being non-denominational and everything else, and having that piece.
You're a spiritual mutt from that standpoint.
Yeah, I am a multi-variety. But so anyway, Mom and I were educated in the Presbyterian Church. We went through the Bethel Bible class study for 2 years, which was great. You walk through the Bible. and it was amazing. And then we
Because
got
she was
involved.
also not raised.
She was not raised in the church. Okay.
Yeah.
She came to faith really kind of like I did, sort of almost by accident, but on purpose, you know.
Yeah.
And the Lord, after we got married, we didn't start in church. But about the time we had Jen, we decided we probably ought to go to church. And the counselor at the school where I was an assistant principal invited us to go to a Christmas Eve service out at an old church called the Risby Church. It was an old Presbyterian church out in the country where they did the candles in the window and the whole deal like that. We started there, and then we went to the big church, Boulder First Presbyterian, you know, right just down the hill from CU, you know. Attended there for a number of years, would drive 45 minutes each way from our place while we were watching across the street at the elementary school that he ended up going to that had Sunday services from St. John's Lutheran.
Yeah.
When they moved in there, and there was no Lutheran church anywhere, there were no churches anywhere in that area.
Yeah.
And so we kept thinking, why are we driving there? First of all, I can't have any influence on my kids or the kids in the school. They don't see Mr. Rapp on the weekend doing something different at the church, you know, because I'm in Boulder, you know. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And why are we driving that way kind of a thing? And so we started going to the Lutheran church. Well, I ended up becoming on church council and then being the church council president for about 3 years kind of a thing, and Mom becomes a Sunday school superintendent, you know, and all of that for a period of time and so on. But we felt restricted. We felt really, I think, hedged in by doctrinal issues.
Yeah.
I think is really what it was, because we couldn't grow past the pastor, and he was limited.
Yeah.
And so then we went to Northern Hills.
Yeah.
And found Northern Hills, and we were there for almost 30 years.
So what do you remember thinking at any time about, like, okay, I didn't have this. This is what I'm trying to instill, like, you know, in your kids. I'm specifically thinking, I know Jake has that story of coming to the faith in his 20s and trying to now be a father, a Christian leader. Any, you know, thoughts or experience with that?
It's difficult to lead by example because we're men and we fail. But I think that's the challenge. Okay, Jesus says, "Be perfect, because your Father is perfect," and so that's the goal. And he knows full well that we're not going to get to that goal because he had to make up the difference, you know, between point A and point B. That's the part that we were never going to get into heaven. But that doesn't mean we don't strive to do our best. And God's given each of us work to do, and it's different for each one of us.
Yeah.
And that ties back into the qualities and the gifts that he's given us, you know. But I think that if you walk the walk you're supposed to, so that your walk matches your talk, the kids pick up on it.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you surround them with other people like yourselves that do the same thing, kind of a thing, so that there is this nurturing that can take place. And kids can see the consistency in Christ.
Yeah.
Okay, that they won't find out in the world.
Yep. And that's, I mean, I remember we were going to church on Sunday morning. It was, you know, unless you were really sick, you were going to go to church. It wasn't going to be missed for anything. Luckily, at that time, most of the sports stuff was still not happening on Sundays. But I know we had some time later with, like, traveling baseball and things that there was some, you know, conflicts there. I don't know if we ever skipped it, but I remember discussions about, you know, we got to go to church, you know, what we're going to do. Like, okay, well, you've got youth group this week, so then you're going to have to do that. But I also remember, you know, walking into your bedroom sometimes and you had your little black new NIV Bible, golden letters on the front. And I mean, and I remember you would be reading it. It had the little tabs or markings on it. I mean, it was used, and I could see that was being used, and it was a part of life, you know, and the meetings and things. And you would just tell me a little bit about what was happening at elders meetings and things, so that I kind of had some idea about the junk that goes on when humans are involved in church. You know, and so I think that was the deal. It was consistency, and when we tease sometimes about times that you might have made a mistake about choosing to discipline me about things I didn't do, but you would apologize. You as a father would apologize to your son if you made a mistake, if you forgot, and it didn't happen much. Because you tried and you cared. If you forgot to pick me up for something, you would apologize.
Right.
And that stuck with me, and I've taken that on now as somebody who is, when I make a mistake, I will own it, and try to get better. And so, I think that's part of the legacy is. You tried to learn things and pass them on, so then now I'm trying to do those things at a younger age and maybe a little bit better so that my kids and then these kids at the school that I have access to and other things, and these nice gentlemen can take some of those lessons because sometime back in the early 1900s, Uncle Don saved, and he has had now not just you, but pretty much the entirety of the Rapp family that found faith was through that.
Yeah. It was actually my Aunt Donna.
Aunt Donna?
His wife.
His wife that really got it.
She said, I'm not going to date a man that isn't a Christian.
Yeah.
And he said, well, I like her enough that I better find out about this kind of a thing.
What is this about the women that?
Not too
Women,
dissimilar.
so, the women have a huge role, guys.
Yeah,
They do.
absolutely.
The challenge that can't be denied.
No, I think what you guys said was so important. I heard a pastor say once, and it's always stuck with me. It was like something along the lines of the most important lessons are the ones that are caught, not taught.
Yep.
And I think about that with my kids, and then of course it scares me when I do fall short, and and my kids see that. But hopefully I'm setting a good
It's the
example
humility.
more often.
Well, one thing you said earlier about how it can be very hard to set an example.
Right.
But one thing that I've noticed when you're telling us about the different parishes, churches, things that you've been a part of, doesn't take you very long for the members of these places to see something in you to put you in a position to help not only spread their word for their congregation, but for others. And you mentioned something about consistency.
Yeah.
Was there something that you believe that they could see in you quickly? Because it seems like you move
He
somewhere.
wears this little name tag that says glutton for punishment.
Oh, yeah. I'm pro elder. But I mean, was there something that you believe that kind of bounced off of you to them to make them think this is the guy this is the guy that I think can get the work done that we need done right now?
Rick mentioned it a while ago, and that is the consistency of the word service. Okay, Jesus said, "I'm among you as one who serves."
Yeah.
Go and do likewise, kind of a thing. And that, I think, is what I've caught. I'm not as good as teaching it, but I may be showing it some. Enough that it opens the door for somebody to inquire further. Now they may not inquire of me, which is fine. Okay, because we're all in the process of helping bring others along. Okay, and I don't need to take credit for this one or that one or that one or that one. God gets the credit.
Right.
The spirit is who gets the credit. But we're there to be the round go where we're supposed to go kind of a thing, and not worry about the triangle inside taking care of the message being taught the way it needs to be taught for that particular person to understand and say, oh, now I get it.
And the other thing that you said that was super interesting, when you felt that God was talking to you,
Yeah.
when you do get that feeling, most of us would think, okay, now I probably got to do some work to validate that, to make sure that I was hearing the right thing that he wanted me to hear. But it almost sounds like you still put your faith in God versus some of those other, now I better find this out about this, and no, I better look this up. You still, aside from doing some of the footwork, it seemed like the whole time you still just believed God's got the path. I might think I know the path, but he knows the path.
No,
is that kind of...
Exactly. The whole walk, the revelations along the road, that whole piece is nothing but that. It is recognizing when I head out my driveway and I do my morning prayer, which I'll paraphrase, and it's not exactly, but God, guide me, guard me, lead me, protect me, watch over me, reach me and teach me, and help me to be the man of God you created me to be and to become, and that I may serve you and you may get the glory. Okay, yeah. Which I think is the whole concept of humbling ourselves, and it's what John the Baptist said to his own followers when they complained about Jesus making more. He says, "No, he needs to become more. I need to become less." Okay, each of us, I think, needs to become less. That self needs to be pushed out, so that God can have His rightful place back where He started. Okay, and that to me is that's what heaven on earth is. Okay, God's in His rightful place. Okay. How could it be any wrong? You're in perfect relationship, okay? And then you can do what Paul says: count it all joy, in the bad or the good. Count it all joy. Yeah.
Do you think if you would have had that same kind of experience like you had on the road in Marble Falls when you were 40, that you would have responded the same way?
That's interesting conjecture because it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Things happen according to God's timing.
Yeah.
Okay, I was doing at 40 what I was supposed to be doing at 40, or maybe not quite as much. Yeah. And He may have had to say, "You're not going to do that in Thornton, Colorado. You got to do that in Marble Falls. Yeah. I've got to change locations in order for me to make you what you need to be for the remainder of your life."
Yeah, that's probably a good thing, because I feel like God is leading me to a tiki hut in the Caribbean Sea right now without a job and just snorkeling,
no research.
Snorkeling and eating fish.
The voice you're hearing is Brianne Smith saying that.
It seems like that's where God is leading me right now.
I think one last thing I really wanted
shouldn't listen.
That's all I was trying to get at. I was like, come on, talk to me.
I think one last thing I really wanted to bring up, because this is an area where I think you modeled it well and I have struggled in it, is boundaries. And one thing it always felt like, I never can look back, I don't recognize any time in the past where I could have looked at you and said you were burned out, and where it felt like it was too much. And either you hid that really well from me growing up, or you were always at the games, you were always at the concerts for my sister, you were there, and it seems like you always had a good idea of what your priorities were and kept them.
Okay. So
whereas I've struggled with overcommitment in my life.
And I have to. Burnout, yes, but no, not very obvious to you, but I definitely burned out. I burned out on the school system. Okay. I had to get out of that because I was having health issues.
Yeah.
Okay. Various things like that. An overcommitment, because I'm the first to say yes and the last to say no, and then to let something go, Yeah. And so, like I said, 17 things in 5 years, kind of a thing that I've been involved with. I probably don't need to be doing all of those, okay? Yeah. I do need to be doing the revelations along the road, the writing, the talking, the teaching, the sharing, that piece. That I need to be doing that, and making sure that those other things fit in with that. Yeah. So they dovetail together, so I don't have these loose ends out here someplace. Yeah. But priorities.
Yeah.
Okay. Mom first. Well, God first.
Yeah.
Mom second. Okay.
Yeah.
You remember that you were growing up, but Mom and I always had to have dates.
Oh, yeah.
We went out and did dates.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So 51 years later, I'm still on a honeymoon with my sweetheart.
Yeah.
Okay.
She still likes you.
Yeah, she still likes me. Yeah. And that's a good thing.
She took you off probation like 3 years ago.
Certainly.
How do you get off that?
51 years.
51 years. And
shorter than the sentence I thought it was still.
And then you guys. Okay. And then other things. Job, church, and all the other stuff.
Yeah. And I can honestly say that's the way it felt growing up.
Yeah.
That's the way it felt.
If you guys had an activity, we were there unless there was some reason that we couldn't be there.
Yep.
That was a priority.
I don't remember any times that that you
You
weren't.
know, if Jen had a flute concert someplace, you know,
We all had to go.
You all
to
had
her
to-
big
you had to go to-
concerts. I love you, Jen.
but you know, we were at every ball game of yours.
Yeah, she sat through far more sports
She did.
things than I went to for her music.
Well, you guys probably know this one, but I'm going to throw it at you anyways. The riddle is, how do you rank most important to least important when it comes to your wife, your mother, and your daughter? And according to God, there is an incorrect answer. How should you rank in your life the importance of your mother, your wife, daughter? Jacob, you first.
I plead the fifth. They're not my answer. Yeah.
That's the best answer I've heard so far.
Which one is in the room with you?
Anyone want to take
No,
a
I get-
stab
there's
at
gotta
this
be
one?
I guess
Yeah.
you'd have to break. There's got to be a biblical answer.
There is actually a
Yeah.
biblical answer?
Yeah, because
Anybody want to? I was wrong.
No, go ahead, bring it.
Okay. The
commandments. Yeah.
the correct order is supposed to actually be wife, daughter, mother. Last.
Okay.
Do you know you guys are pretty into this stuff? Why do you think that might be? Why do you believe mother would be last of those three?
Well, I guess I'm just going Genesis on it here now. So, to become one flesh right in the beginning,
Yeah.
and the commandments
Yeah.
come later.
Yeah,
Right.
and then you're
Yeah.
responsible for raising the child.
Raising the child.
But then there remains the ongoing commitment to
To mother.
honor your mother
Yeah,
and father.
And that's one of Jesus' last statements. Is, there's your mom, and
Yeah, he took care of
there's
his mom.
there's your son.
Yeah, I was trying to wrestle with, that's the order I would put them in. But yeah, I mean, the fact is they're still all important.
Yeah, but the jokes are normally, well, if my wife's mad at me, the daughter's gonna shoot up the list. Pretty
Why
quick
didn't you
on
bring
that
up
one.
where does
You know,
where does mother-in-law fall?
Well, outside
fall could be the correct word there, I
outside the
suppose.
box somewhere.
I love you, Susie.
we
Susie,
bring it down.
Did you say fall, slip, or get pushed? I'm not.
I'm blessed with an amazing mother-in-law, actually, so I'm very lucky. Well, thank you, Dad, for sharing your story.
Yes,
I think
thank
we're
you,
going to
Tom.
be trying
My
to
honor,
do
guys.
You're something else, young man. Thank you so
Thank you
much
very
for
much.
spending
We're
time
looking
with
forward.
us.
I'm gonna-
78 for calling me young. I appreciate that.
We're going to be, I think, doing some side episodes, me and my dad, going through some of these
Excellent.
revelations on the road and putting those out as another branch of the Axe and Scalpel podcast tree. So with that, I'm going to say we're going to leave with the blessing. May the Lord bless you all. May the Lord keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you. May he bring you purpose and mission and calling at every stage of life. Amen.
Amen.
And thanks, guys.
Thank you.
You, sir.